next phase of the project. So basically what I'm going to do today is I'm going to explain how you're going to move on to the next phase. So hopefully the first couple of phases were somewhat something you've done before. You've probably done research before and you've written research projects. Now we're moving into something you've probably never done before. So make sure you listen to this and take notes and really understand what's going to be required of you, because it's going to be different than what you've normally done. Okay, so I'm going to go through it step by step so you can understand what's going to be required of you. Okay, so this is phase 4. This is going to be, oops, I see I have typed it. Oh, this is when you're going to start your data collection, plan, and survey. So that's what we're going to move into today. Okay, now one of the things you've done is you've done lots and lots of research and you become an expert on your field. You basically know probably more than 95% of most people in the world on your topic. Okay, so when you look back at all of that information, you need to develop a hypothesis. You need to write down a question about the research that you would like to know the answer to. So you want to know what people's opinions are on a specific aspect of your project. So this is an example. Should the state be required to pay for DNA analysis in cases that could possibly exonerate convicted criminals? So that's the question you're trying to answer. So you've done all this research on DNA and wrongful convictions and all of this stuff. Now you need to develop a question. What do you want to know about what people think about one aspect of your problem? So it should be based on a question. So you want to start with a question. So think through all of your research and then think, what question do I want to know what people think about? And write it as a question. But then once you've written that question, it's like Jeopardy. You're going to turn it into an answer. So write the question and then turn it into an answer, and that's your hypothesis. So my question was, I wonder if people think the state should pay for DNA testing, or should the defense attorneys be required to pay for that testing? And then you say, okay, I think the state should be required. So my question is, who should pay for it? My hypothesis is turned into a statement. And my statement now is the state should be required to pay for DNA testing. That statement is your hypothesis. That's what you're trying to test. You're trying to figure out if people agree with your statement. One thing I will tell you is you want to make it somewhat controversial in a sense. Like you want it to be a clear thing that people could have just an opinion on one or the other side. You don't just want it to be kind of a neutral concept. So you really need to think through your research and think about something that would be somewhat controversial in your research, that you would like to know people's opinions, and really be sure that that has two sides. And then pick a side. It doesn't matter what side you pick, and pick a side, and that will become your hypothesis. Now, when you're thinking about this, what we're doing in phase 4, another important thing you have to be familiar with is your language. So hopefully in your phase 3, you wrote a glossary of the terms that were significant for people to know what they were. This is going to be important in your survey in a minute when I talk about your survey, because when you give a survey, you have to provide your audience with some basic information so they know how to answer the questions. So when you look back at your glossary, you want to think, what terms do I need my survey takers to know and understand so they can properly answer this survey? So if you're using jargon or big words and they have no idea what you're talking about, they're not going to be able to answer your survey. So you're really going to have to think about what terms they need to know. And if it's a term they need to know to properly answer your survey, you're going to have to include that definition somewhere at the top of your survey before the person actually takes the survey. Okay, so we're going to test that hypothesis. We're going to figure out what people think about your hypothesis. So we need to develop a plan. What is our plan? How are we going to do that? What are we going to do? How are we going to collect that data? So that's what we're going to talk about, is creating that data collection plan. Now, the steps for data collection, these are the steps. First of all, identify what information you're trying to gather. So that's like developing your hypothesis and figuring out what you're going to ask people. Then you're going to develop a tool to gather that information. And then you're going to collect the data and analyze that data. Now, for this week only, you're going to do the first two. That's it. You're not doing the last two yet. So you're just going to figure out what information you're trying to gather, and you're going to develop the tool for gathering that information. So I'm going to go through how you do both those steps. So the first thing is identify the information you're trying to gather. So the first step of that is developing your hypothesis. And again, you want a clear hypothesis that states an opinion and know that there could be answers on both sides. Some could agree with you, some could disagree with your hypothesis. What you're trying to do is gather information about how people feel. So you could be collecting quantitative information and qualitative. So I'm going to discuss the differences. So the first one is quantitative. You're trying to find out actual numerical measures of what people think about your questions. So you're going to do a survey with a scale, and you can quantitatively with numbers say 20% agreed with this and 30% did not agree with this. So you need to want to collect that quantitative information. You're also going to possibly collect qualitative research. So qualitative is more observations, interpretations, things that you see, your own thoughts about patterns and relationships. So sometimes people develop this through field interviews. They go and interview people, or they do personal observations. In ours, we're not going to do that. We're going to do quantitative, and then you could have one question or two at the end that are open-ended questions where people could just explain how they feel. And those will be your more qualitative research questions, okay? Now, the first thing then is develop a plan on the information that we want to gather. So we're going to write out a blueprint or plan for what we're going to do. Okay, we're not going to just willy-nilly do this. We're going to actually think about it and work through a specific plan. So the first thing we're going to decide is, who are we going to question? Okay, so who are you going to ask to complete this survey? Are you going to ask your friends on Facebook or Instagram? Are you going to ask your family? Are you going to ask friends at school? Who do you want to answer your survey? I would suggest you try to make it a diverse group as possible. Try to get different ethnicities, genders, occupations. You don't just want all police officers or all college students. You want some diversity in the type of person that you're asking your questions to. So first, who are you going to question? Number two, what questions are you going to ask? So you need to think about your topic and then think about different questions you can ask. Now you're going to ask variable questions and then questions specific on your topic. And I'll explain each of those as we go through. Then you have to decide how you're going to share it. Are you going to share it online? A lot of people now either do SurveyMonkey or they do and share the link on Facebook. They can do Google surveys. Think about how you want to share this survey. And then identify when you will share the survey. So when is the best time to share this survey? I will tell you when you're deciding where to share it and when you're creating it, you don't want hundreds and hundreds of responses. So if you do share it on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, you may want to limit it to, I would suggest no more than 25 or 30 responses. We are not actually becoming like statisticians and doing like real, truly accurate statistical analysis here. I'm just teaching you the process of research, okay? So I don't expect you to have 300 pool and do all of these things. I just want you to learn the process, right? If you go on to a four-year school or even a master's program, you will have to do this. My job here, though, is just so you know the process to do it. So then when you go to do it, you can get more technical later. But now with me, you've learned the step-by-step process of how to do it. And you'll have some understanding of how that works. So don't make it unreasonable on yourself. Now you need at least around 20 research surveys to be able to do some analysis. But you don't need hundreds. So keep it simple. Keep it between 20 and 30, something like that. You don't want to go overboard. Okay, so once you come up with your plan, then you want to develop a tool. What are you going to do to get this information? And that's your survey. So you are actually going to create a survey. Now, how do you do that? So the first part of your survey is going to be your little introduction. So you're going to want to provide them with a couple sentences explaining what you're trying to achieve, right? You're trying to gather opinions on a certain thing. So you may have to explain your topic. So you may want to go back to like your very first intro or what you wrote in your literary review, because you want to give the reader a couple sentences so they understand what your topic is. The other thing is that this is the section if you need to provide definitions so they understand what you're talking about, you insert your definitions. So DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, which blah, 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 blah. So you may need to explain those types of things in this little introduction to your survey. If you just dive into the survey, they may not have enough background information to provide you with accurate answers to your survey. So make sure that you tell them all that they need to know, and you also need to tell them that it's voluntary and anonymous. So you should not be collecting names or any identifying information, so security numbers, anything like that. And it's completely voluntary, okay? And they need to know that this is voluntary. You can choose to not answer if you don't want to, and it's anonymous. You're not going to disclose anybody's identity. So that should be in there in that intro paragraph somewhere. The next thing is deciding what to ask. So the first thing you want to decide is variables. So one of the things we're going to analyze is how different groups answered your question differently. So you need to know some basic demographics about the people that are you're surveying, because you're not getting names or identifying like social security numbers or anything like that. So you need to be able to segregate them out in other ways using other variables. So what are variables? General information or factors about the actual test taker or the survey taker, okay? So what are some things that you may want to use as variables? Age. So you may have age ranges on there. Are you 18 to 21? Are you 21 to 25? Are you 26 to 30? So age. So when you think about your topic, think about what different age groups answer these questions differently. Race or ethnicity could be a variable. Does ethnicity or race affect people's answers to your question or your hypothesis? Sex, gender, does that have an effect on your topic? Marital status, married, divorced, single, would that be a factor? Education level. Do you think people have no college answer them different than 4 years of college, answer them different than advanced degrees? Employment information. So are you employed? Are you unemployed? That could be a variable. Household income. Most people may not want to disclose that, so that may not be something you want to answer. Generally, people are asking for variables when they've done this: age, ethnicity, gender, marital status. There could be other things, right? You could include other things that are variables. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure. Sometimes you could have variables that are going to be like political party. Maybe different political party would have a significant impact on how they would answer these. Maybe religion. So you're not limited to these things. Think about what factors, demographic factors, would affect how people would answer your questions. And only include the ones that apply to your topic. And I would think you probably wouldn't have more than 5 variable questions at the most. So you're only going to have about 5 questions or less asking them about this information. So you're not going to have every single one. Just think about the ones that apply to your topic. Okay, so identify each variable that you believe that will impact it, and then explain why you think that's a good variable. So that's part of your plan. Okay. Then you need to have a scale. So remember, we're doing quantitative. So we need to be able to put numbers to our information. So we need to develop a scale. So we're going to write questions, and they're going to then answer the question using a scale. Okay, so they're not going to just free willy-nilly answer the questions. They're going to have to circle a number or some sort of scale that you're predetermining for each question. And you'll have to decide what scale that you want to use for each question. And the scales can vary from question to question if you want. Most times they don't, but sometimes they do. So this is an example where they just have unacceptable, needs improvement, satisfactory, excellent. So they're just checking the box. So they read the question and then check the box. So you could have something like that if you wanted. You could have more what we call a liker scale. So they have a question and then after it, they circle the number. You have to make sure that you have an explanation of what your scale is. So 1 is disagree, 5 is disagree, strongly disagree, 5 is disagree, 10 is strongly agree. So they know what the scale means. So make sure you clearly define and explain your scale. So that's another way you could do it. And you could list them like this. Sometimes you have check boxes. A lot of times these are your variables are going to be set up in this way, which, so you could say, this one says, which of the following gadget that you bought recently, and then you give them a list and they only check the ones that apply. So a lot of times your variable are this way, check your age range, and then you have the age range listed and you just check the age range that's appropriate for yours. Identify your ethnicity and then give them choices, okay? Make sure you have lots of choices for them. You may even want choices that say not applicable or not willing to answer or stuff like that. So a lot of times you're going to have like almost a multiple choice type of question for some of them. This is just another one. This one shows you some of those open-ended questions, the qualitative. So you're going to have the other questions that are all going to be based on the scale. And then I would suggest you don't have more than 1 or 2 at the max of these qualitative open-ended questions because they're very hard to analyze. So most of your questions are going to have a set scale. But if you want to add a qualitative type of open-ended question where they can write anything they want at the end, you can definitely do that. Okay. So once you decide on the format, then you need to decide what you're going to ask. So you need to make sure you're thinking about specific questions. So clearly you have to ask those demographic variable questions. And then you need to think about what you want to know in order to get to the heart of your hypothesis. So this is, I think, one of the hardest parts because people just want to ask one question about their hypothesis, like the state should pay, right? So you have to think of different ways to ask questions to get to the heart of your topic, right? So you could have a question on what type of evidence should be, how much money should defense attorneys be given to hire experts, and then have ranges. What type of experts should the state pay for? Who should pay? Probably the state, the defense attorneys, blah, blah, legal aid societies. So you want to think of different ways to ask the same sort of similar questions and really get to a variety of different questions about your topic. And it can be hard. And if you're struggling with this, give me a call. And we'll Zoom or something, and we can just brainstorm. Sometimes this is one of those things you just want to brainstorm, and when you're talking through it, you can come up with questions. And this is the hardest part students struggle with. I can't figure out what questions to ask. So if you just talk through it with me or whoever, you can come up with different questions. And then when you turn it in, I'll give you different suggestions also. So a couple practical considerations. Make sure you provide the basic information and the definitions. Make it interesting so people want to take it. Make it short and simple. You should not have more than 10 questions. So you really only want a maximum of 10 questions. You may have 1 or 2 less, or maybe 1 or 2 more. I wouldn't really go over it though. And you really only want 1 short answer, and you want to make sure you use the scale whenever possible. Other ethical considerations you have to make sure you're considering. You don't want to write the questions in a way that suggests the answer. So try to write your questions as fair and impartially as you can. And really think about the words you're using to write your questions. Because sometimes people, this happens every semester, they write the question, they think they're so clear, and when they get the answers, it was clear that the reader did not understand what you were asking. So really give it some thought, what you're asking and how you're asking it, and make sure it would be clear to your reader and that you're not influencing their decisions with your questions. Don't ask questions that could cause physical or psychological harm. So be careful about what personal information that you're asking, because sometimes that could be triggering. So really be careful about the types of questions you're asking. Choose your participants wisely. Again, make it a variety of people if you can. Every semester, somebody's like, I wish I had more females. I wish I had more minorities. So try to be careful of who you ask to get some variety. Don't violate privacy. Make sure it's anonymous. Make sure they know it's volunteer. We already talked about that. And the last thing is don't ask them questions that can put them for civil or criminal liability. Don't ask, have you committed a crime? And to ask them those kinds of questions. You don't want them admitting something that could hurt them later. So really be considerate of the questions you ask. Now, this is really, really important. Do not send your surveys out until I have approved them. No survey can be sent out until I give you the high sign. So you need to actually type out the survey and send me the sample survey. Now, some people say, I'm using SurveyMonkey. Can I just do it in there? No, because I can't see it always to grade it. So although it's annoying, you're going to have to type it first into some sort of Word document so I can see the format, I can see what it's going to look like, I can see your scale. And then you'll have to convert it to the program that you're going to use. But I have to actually see a hard copy. Another thing is when you do your final paper, you have to attach the survey, the uncompleted survey, to the paper. So if it's not typed up in some sort of Word form, you're not going to have that to be able to attach later. So I know it's annoying. I'm making you type it up in a document and then put it into the program, but you're going to have to do that. You need to do both so I can prove it. Okay. So that is it. If you have any questions, like I said, this is something you've probably never done. It's confusing. So please reach out if you have any questions. If you're confused or anything like that, reach out to me and I'll be happy to work through this with you. You can always turn it in and I'm going to make my comments and send it back to you. And then I will give you the final thumbs up and then what you can move into the next phase. But you cannot move into the next phase until I've approved your survey. Okay, so good luck. Get started right away. It's a little more complicated than normal. And let me know if you have any problems. See you soon.